We're live. We're live. And it's Wednesday. And you're here. And I'm here. And it is actually beautiful outside today. Still middle 80s, but the humidity finally quit. So it's kind of nice out. So the dogs are outside, so we don't have to worry about kind of nonsense in here tonight. And yeah. Not a lot new at the Wolves Den, but that's kind of okay. It's weird having a 15-year-old with internet access. When I was 15, that was 31 years ago. And news of the world you got if your parents had news on before, during, or after supper. And we'd have some teachers talk about it, but it wasn't like it is now. I was having a conversation on the phone with somebody a little bit ago, and my son came in and he said, "Were you talking about, the BBB?" And I want to be optimistic that good people will do good things. I usually try. But I don't know. I mean, it will be eventually. I'm just not sure the timeline. And those of you that know me outside of here know how poorly I do without a timeline. That's just in the spicy part of my brain. So yeah. So at this point, as Mrs. Walburn from East Noble Show Choir would say, cope and adjust. Cope and adjust. But I'm kind of sick of coping and managing and all of that. So yeah. I know you guys are feeling the same way, and sorry to kind of bring that down, but all of that happened like right before I came on here. So processing, just a moment. Sorry. No, I'm not. This is me. You guys signed on here because it's me. So yeah. Tonight we do not have a spicy drink. We just have lemon lime flavored water. And I know it's still flavored. It's still got gross stuff in it that you shouldn't have, but it's not soda. Trying to be better. Little by little. That's all we can do, right? Little by little. But anyway, tonight we're starting a new book. This one is The Irish Fairy Tales, because this is the one that was requested. And this particular one, the general editor is Jake Jackson. So I was trying to find a graphic for the thumbnail, and I picked this up at a used bookstore. So yeah, so there's different versions, because of course these are old stories, so people have just made their own little compilations. And this one has a breakdown of the different kind of, I guess, themes of the stories. So there's a 15-page introduction, which I may just see if I can find the link to this book and put it in the description so you guys can read the introduction, but it's pretty good. I was looking through that earlier, but the sections that got romance and tragedy, that's not a good way to start reading. Heroes and giants, fairies and sea folk, and supernatural forces. So I think we've got just a 12-page story tonight. I'm going to start with the Enchanted Cave just because it's the first story in here. But you guys feel free to put in the comments if there is a section that you would like me to read, if you want to just go section by section, if you want to do one out of each grouping. There are quite a few more in the fairies and sea folk, of course, and the heroes and giants than the other two categories, but we'll do it how you guys want to do. I'm real easy like that. So, yes, so tonight we're going to start with the romance and tragedy section, and it has its own little introduction. Fairy tales are often grounded in the pursuit and perils of love. Not all of them end in happiness and wedded bliss, as demonstrated by the story from the Ulster cycle of the doomed Deirdre, one of the most famous tragic heroines in Irish legend. The version of Deirdre's story given here is joined by other stories of adventure and young love. Some are packed with all the elements you could wish for from a fairy tale: magic, royalty, giants, quests, and serpents, while others are moral tales at heart. So we'll get started with our romance tonight, because who couldn't use a little bit more romance in their life? So yes, thank you guys for being here. If you're here, you're probably already subscribed, so thank you. If you are here and not subscribed yet, go ahead, click the little thing. We do this every Wednesday. If you want to share this party with more people, because I know that you do, go ahead and share that. Kind of share it everywhere. We got a few more subscribers between last Wednesday and tonight, so thank you guys so much for joining in with us. And yeah, I really want to see what we can do with this by the end of 2025. And yeah, we've only got 6 more months, so we got stories to get us probably through to there. And now all we need is more folks watching. So get the word out there, and we will get started tonight. Our story is going to be called The Enchanted Cave. A long, long time ago, Prince Cuglas, master of the hounds to the High King of Erin, sent out from Tara to the chase. As he was leaving the palace, the light mists were drifting away from the hilltops, and the rays of the morning sun were falling aslant on the Grinnin or sunny bower of the Princess Ailin. Glancing upward towards it, the prince doffed his plumed and jeweled hunting cap, and the princess answered his salute by a wave of her little hand that was as white as a wild rose in the hedges in June. And leaning from her bower, she watched the huntsman until his tossing plumes were hidden by the green waving branches of the woods. The Princess Ailin was was over head and ears in love with Cuglas, and Cuglas was over head and ears in love with the Princess Ailin, and he believed that never was summer morning half as bright, or as sweet, or as fair as she. The glimpse which he had just caught of her filled his heart with delight, and almost put all thought of hunting out of his head, when suddenly the tuneful cries of the hounds, answered by 100 echoes from the groves, broke upon his ear. The dogs had startled a dappled deer that bounded away through the forest. The prince, spurring his gallant steed, pushed on in eager pursuit. On through the forest sped the deer, through soft, green, secret ways and flowery dells, then out from the forest, up heathery hills and over long stretches of moorland, and across brown, rushing streams, sometimes in view of the hounds, sometimes lost to sight, but always ahead of them. All day long the chase continued, and at last, when the sun was sinking, the dogs were close upon the panting deer, and the prince believed he was about to secure his game, when the deer suddenly disappeared through the mouth of a cave which opened before him. The dogs followed at his heels, and the prince endeavored to rein in his steed, but the impetuous animal bore him on, and soon was clattering over the stony floor of the cave in perfect darkness. Cuglas could hear ahead of him the cries of the hounds growing fainter and fainter as they increased the distance between them and him. Then the cries ceased altogether, and the only sound the prince heard was the noise of his horse's hooves sounding in the hollow cave. Once more he endeavored to check his career, but the reins broke in his hands, and in that instant the prince felt the horse had taken a plunge into a gulf and was sinking down and down, as a stone cast from the summit of a cliff sinks down to the sea. At last, the horse struck the ground again, and the prince was almost thrown out of his saddle, but he succeeded in regaining his seat. Well, okay. Then on through the darkness galloped the steed, and when he came into the light, the prince's eyes were for some time unable to bear it. But when he got used to the brightness, he saw he was galloping over a grassy plain, and in the distance he perceived the hounds rushing toward a wood faintly visible through a luminous summer haze. The prince galloped on, and as he approached the wood, he saw coming toward him a comely champion, wearing a shining brown cloak, fastened by a bright bronze spear-like brooch, and bearing a white hazel wand in one hand, and a single-edged sword with a hilt made from the tooth of a seahorse in the other. And the prince knew by the dress of the champion, and by his wand and sword, that he was a royal herald. As the herald came close to him, the prince's steed stopped of his own accord. "You are welcome, Cuglas," said the herald, "and I have been sent by the Princess Creed to greet you and to lead you to her court, where you've been so long expected." "I know not how this may be," said Cuglas. How it has come about I shall tell you as we go along," said the herald. "The Princess Creed is the queen of the floating island, and it chanced, once upon a day, when she was visiting her fairy kinsmen, who dwell in one of the pleasant hills that lie near Terra, she saw you with a high king and princes and nobles of Erin following the chase. And seeing you, her heart went out to you, and wishing to bring you to her court, she sent one of her nymphs, in the form of a deer, to lure you on through the cave, which is the entrance to this land." Magic. "I am deeply honored by the preference shown me by the princess," said Cuglas, "but I may not tarry in her court, for above in Erin there's the Lady Aelin, the loveliest of all the ladies who grace the royal palace, and before the princess and chiefs of Erin she has promised to be my bride." "Of that I know not," said the herald, "but a true champion like you cannot, I know, refuse to come with me to the court of the Princess Creed." As the herald had said these words to the prince, and he were on the verge of the wood, and they entered. Ah, sorry, I read that absolutely wrong. It was making no sense to my brain. As the herald had said these words, the prince and he were on the verge of the wood, and they entered upon a mossy pathway that broadened out as they advanced until it was as wide as one of the great roads of Erin. Before they had gone very far, the prince heard the tinkling of silver bells in the distance, and almost as soon as he heard them, he saw coming up towards him a troop of warriors on coal-black steeds. All the warriors wore helmets of shining silver and cloaks of blue silk, and on the horses' breasts were crescents of silver, on which were hung tiny silver bells, shaking out music with the motion of the horses. As the prince approached the champions, they lowered their spears, and dividing in two lines, the prince and the herald passed between the ranks, and the champions, forming again, followed on behind the prince. That would be so weird. I mean, at some point you probably become accustomed to it, but just like walking in a place and it parts for you, and then people just gathering behind you and keep walking, it'd be weird. At last they passed through the wood, and they found themselves on a green plain speckled with flowers. And they had not gone far when the prince saw coming toward him 100 champions on snow-white steeds. and around the breasts of the steeds were crescents of gold, from which were hanging little golden bells. The warriors all wore golden helmets, and the shafts of their shining spears were of gold, and golden sandals on their feet, and yellow silken mantles fell down over their shoulders. And when the prince came near them, they lowered their lances, and then they turned their horses' heads around and marched before him. And it was not long until above the pleasant jingle of the bells, the prince heard the measured strains of music, and he saw coming towards him a band of harpers, dressed in green and gold. And when the harpers had saluted the prince, they marched in front of the cavalcade, playing all the time. And it was not long until they came to a stream that ran like a blue ribbon around the foot of a green hill, on the top of which was a sparkling palace. The stream was crossed by a golden bridge, so narrow that the horsemen had to go two by two. The herald asked the prince to halt, and to allow all the champions to go before him. And the cavalcade ascended the hill, the sunlight brightly glancing on helmet and on lance, and when it reached the palace, the horsemen filed around the walls. When at length the prince and herald crossed the bridge and began to climb the hill, the prince thought he felt the ground moving under them, and on looking back he could see no sign of the golden bridge, and the blue stream had already become as wide as great river. It was becoming wider every second. Fairies. Fairies. You are on the floating island now, said the herald, and before you is the palace of the Princess Creed. At that moment, the queen came out through the palace door, and the prince was so dazzled by her beauty that only for the golden bracelet he wore upon his right arm under the sleeve of his silken tunic, he might have almost forgotten the Princess Ailyn. This bracelet was made by the dwarves who dwell in the heart of the Scandinavian mountains, and was sent with other costly presents by the king of Scandinavia to the king of Erin, and he gave it to the princess. And it was the virtue of this bracelet that whoever was wearing it could not forget the person who gave it to him, and it could never be loosened from the arm by any art or magic spell. But if the wearer, even for a single moment, liked anyone better than the person who gave it to him, that very moment the bracelet fell off from the arm and could never again be fastened on. And when the princess promised her hand in marriage to the Prince Cuglas, she closed the bracelet on his arm. The fairy queen knew nothing of the bracelet, and she hoped that before the prince was long in the floating island, he would forget all about the princess. You are welcome, Cuglas, said the queen, and as she held out her hand, and Cuglas having thanked her for her welcome, they entered the palace together. You must be weary after your long journey, said the queen. My page will lead you to your apartments, where a bath of the cool blue waters of the lake has been made ready for you. And when you've taken your bath, the pages will lead you to the banquet hall where the feast is spread. At the feast, the prince was seated beside the queen, and she talked to him of all the pleasures that were in store for him in fairyland, where pain and sickness and sorrow and old age are unknown, and where every rosy hour that flies is brighter than the one that has fled before it. And when the feast was ended, the queen opened the dance with the prince, and it was not until the moon was high above the floating island that the prince retired to rest. He was so tired after his journey and the dancing that he fell into a sound sleep. When he awoke the next morning, the sun was shining brightly, and he heard outside the palace the jingle of bells and the music of baying hounds, and his heart was stirred by memories of the many pleasant days on which he had led the chase over the plains and through the green woods of Tara. That's right, go home. Just go home. Just go home. He looked out through the window, and he saw all the fairy champions mounted on their steeds ready for the chase, and at their head the fairy queen. And at that moment the pages came to say the queen wished to know if he would join them. And the prince went out and found his steed ready, saddled and bridled, and they spent the day hunting in the forest that stretched away for miles behind the palace, and the night in feasting and dancing. When the prince awoke the following morning, he was summoned by the pages to the presence of the queen. The prince found the queen out on the lawn outside the palace, surrounded by her court. "We shall go on the lake today, Cuglas," said the queen, and taking his arm, she led him along the water's edge, all the courtiers following. When she was close to the water, she waved her hand, and in a second, 1,000 boats, shining like glass, shot up from beneath the lake and set their bows against the bank, their bows against the bank. "Berries!" Sorry. "Berries!" I had to, because I think Ashley's probably watching, and that felt like a very Fairly Odd Parents moment. So I'm going to just digress for a second. And get a little drink. Okay. The queen and Cuglas stepped into one, and when they were seated, 2 fairy harpers took their places in the prow. All the other boats were soon thronged by fairies, and then the queen waved her wand again, and an awning of purple silk rose over the boat, and silken awning of various colors over the others, and the royal boat moved off from the bank, followed by all the rest. And in every boat sat a harper with a golden harp, and when the queen waved her hand for the 3rd time, the harper struck the trembling chords, and to the sound of the delightful music, the boats glided over the sunlit lake. And on they went, until they approached the mouth of a gentle river, sliding down between banks clad with trees. Up the river, close to the bank and under the drooping trees, they sailed, and when they came to a bend in the river, from which the lake could no longer be seen, they pushed their prows in against the bank, and the queen and Cuglas and all the party left the boats and went on under the trees until they came to a mossy glade. "I don't trust her. Berries!" Then the queen waved her wand, and silken couches were spread under the trees, and she and Cuglas sat on one apart from the others, and the courtiers took their places in proper order. There is always a proper order. And the queen waved her wand again, and wind shook the trees above them, and the most luscious fruit that was ever tasted fell down into their hands. And when the feast was over, there was dancing in the glades to the music of the harps. And when they were tired dancing, they set out for the boats, and the moon was rising above the trees as they sailed away over the lake. And it was not long until they reached the bank below the fairy palace. Well, between hunting in the forest and sailing over the lake and dancing in the greenwood glade and in the banquet hall, the days passed. But all the time the prince was thinking of the Princess Ailin, and one moonlit night, when he was lying awake on his couch thinking of her, a shadow was suddenly cast on the floor. Because we've not seen Creed yet. The prince looked toward the window, and what should he see sitting on the sill outside but a little woman tapping the pane with a golden bodkin. The prince jumped from his couch and opened the window, and the little woman floated on the moonbeams into the room and sat down on the floor. "You are thinking of the Princess Ailin," said the little woman. "I never think of anyone else," said the prince. "I know that," said the little woman, "and it's because of your love for each other, and because her mother was a friend to me in the days gone by, that I have come here to try and help you. But there's not much time for talking. The night advances. At the bank below, a boat awaits you. Step into it, and it will lead you to the mainland. And when you reach it, you will find before you a path that will take you to the green fields of Erin and the plains of Terra. I know you will have to face danger. I know not what kind of danger, but whatever it may be, do not draw your sword before you tread upon the mainland. For if you do, you shall never reach it. And the boat will come back again to the floating island. And now go, and may luck go with you." In saying this, the little woman climbed up the moonbeams and disappeared. The prince left the palace and descended to the lake, and there before him he saw a glistening boat. He stepped into it, and the boat went on and on beneath the moon, and at last he saw the mainland, and he could trace a winding pathway going away from the shore. The sight filled his heart with joy, but suddenly the milk-white moonshine died away, and looking up to the sky, he saw the moon turning fiery red, and the waters of the lake, shining like silver a moment before, took on a blood-red hue. And a wind arose that stirred the waters, and they leaped up against the little boat, tossing it from side to side. While Cuglas was wondering at the change, he heard a strange, unearthly noise ahead of him, and a bristling monster, lifting its claws above the water, in a moment was beside the boat, and stuck one of his claws in the left arm of the prince, and pierced the flesh to the bone. Oh no! Maddened by the pain, the prince drew his sword and chopped off the monster's claw. The one thing she said not to do. The monster disappeared beneath the lake, and as it did so, the color of the water changed, and the silver moonlight shone down from the sky again. But the boat no longer went on towards the mainland, but sped back towards the floating island, while forth from the island came a fleet of ferry boats to meet it, led by the shallop of the fairy queen. The queen greeted the prince as if she knew not of his attempted flight, and to the music of the harps, the fleet returned to the palace. The next day passed, and the night came, and again the prince was lying on the couch, thinking of the Princess Ailin, and again he saw the shadow on the floor and heard the tapping against the window. And when he opened it, the little woman slid into the room. "You failed last night," she said, "but I have come to give you another chance. Tomorrow the queen must set out on a visit to her fairy kinsmen, who dwell in the green hill near the plain of Tara. She cannot take you with her, for if your feet once touch the green grass that grows in the fruitful fields of Erin, she can never bring you back again. And so, when you find she has left the palace, go at once into the banquet hall and look behind the throne, and you will see a small door let down into the ground. Pull this up and descend the steps at which you will see. Where they lead to, I cannot tell. What dangers may be before you, I do not know. But this I know. If you accept anything, no matter what it is, from anyone you may meet on your way, you shall not set foot on the soil of Erin." Pretty clear. Don't take candy from strangers. And having said this, the little woman, rising from the floor, floated out through the window. The prince returned to his couch, and the next morning, as soon as he heard the queen had left the palace, he hastened to the banquet hall. He discovered the door and descended the steps, and found himself in a gloomy and lonesome valley. Jagged mountains, black as night, rose on either side, and huge rocks seemed ready to topple down upon him at every step. Through broken clouds, a watery moon shed a faint, fitful light that came and went as the clouds, driven by a moaning wind, passed over the valley. Cuglas, nothing daunted, pushed on boldly until a bank of cloud shut out completely the struggling moon, and closing over the valley, covered it like a pall, leaving him in perfect darkness. At the same moment, the moaning wind died away, and with it died away all sound. The darkness and the death-like silence sent an icy chill to the heart of Cuglas. He held his hand close to his eyes, but he saw it not. He stamped his foot on the rocky ground, but no sound was returned to him. He rattled his sword in its brazen scabbard, but it gave no answer back to him. His heart grew colder and colder, when suddenly the cloud above him was rent in a dozen places, and lightning flashed through the valley, and the thunder rolled over the echoing mountains. In the lurid glare of the lightning, Cuglas saw 100 ghostly forms sweeping toward him, uttering as they came nearer and nearer shrieks so terrible that the silence of death could more easily be borne. Cuglas turned to escape, but they hemmed him round and pressed their clammy hands upon his face. Oh, no. Oh. With a yell of horror, he drew his sword and slashed about him. In that very moment, the forms vanished. The thunder ceased. The dark cloud passed, and the sun shone out as bright as on a summer day. And then Cuglas knew the forms he had seen were those of the wild people of the glen. With renewed courage, he pursued his way through the valley, and after 3 or 4 windings, it took him out upon a sandy desert. He had no sooner set foot upon the desert than he heard behind him a crashing sound louder than thunder. He looked around, and he saw that the walls of the mountain through which he had just passed had fallen into the valley and filled it up so that he could no longer tell where it had been. Ooh, so no shade, can't get back. The sun was beating fiercely on the desert, and the sands were almost as hot as burning cinders. And as Cuglas advanced over them, his body became dried up, and his tongue clove to the roof of his mouth. And when his thirst was at its height, a fountain of sparkling water sprang up in the burning plain a few paces in front of him. But when he came up quite close to it and stretched out his parched hands to cool them in the limpid waters, the fountain vanished as suddenly as it appeared. With great pain, and almost choking with heat and thirst, he struggled on. And again the fountain sprang up in front of him and moved before him, almost within his reach. At last he came to the end of the desert, and he saw a green hill up which a pathway climbed. But as he came to the foot of the hill, there, sitting right in his way, was a beautiful fairy holding out towards him a crystal cup, over the rim of which flowed water as clear as crystal. Unable to resist the temptation, the prince seized the cold, bright goblet and drank the water. When he did so, his thirst vanished, but the fairy and the green hill and the burning desert disappeared, and he was standing in the forest behind the palace of the fairy queen. Excuse me. I know, but I know. That evening, the queen returned, and at the feast, she talked as gaily to the prince as if she knew not of his attempt to leave the floating island. And the prince spoke as gaily as he could to her, although in his heart there was sadness when he remembered that if only he had dashed away the crystal cup, he would be at that moment in the royal banquet hall of Tara, sitting beside the Princess Ailyn. And he thought of the feast that would never end. And he thought the feast would never end. But it was over at last, and the prince returned to his apartments. And that night, as he lay on his couch, he kept his eyes fixed upon the window. But hours passed, and there was no sign of anyone. At long last, and when he had given up all hope of seeing her, he heard a tapping at the window, and he got up and opened it, and the little woman came in. "You failed again today," said she. "Failed just at the very moment when you were about to step on the green hills of Erin. I can give you only one more chance. It will be your last. The queen will go hunting in the morning. Join the hunt, and when you are separated from the rest of the party in the wood, throw your reins upon your horse's neck, and he will lead you to the edge of the lake. Then cast this golden bodkin into the lake in the direction of the mainland, and a golden bridge will be thrown across, over which you can pass safely to the fields of Erin. But take care and do not draw your sword. For if you do, your steed will bear you back again to the floating island, and here you must remain forever." Then handing the bodkin to the prince and saying goodbye, the little woman disappeared. The next morning, the queen and the prince and all the court went out to hunt, and a fleet white deer started out before them, and the royal party pressed after him in pursuit. The prince's steed outstripped the others, and when he was alone, the prince flung the reins upon the horse's neck, and before long he came to the edge of the lake. There the prince cast the bodkin out onto the water, and a golden bridge was thrown across to the mainland. And the horse galloped onto it, and when the prince was more than halfway, he saw riding towards him a champion wearing a silver helmet, and carrying on his left arm a silver shield, and holding in his right hand a gleaming sword. As he came nearer, he struck his shield with his sword and challenged the prince to battle. The prince's sword almost leaped out of its scabbard at the martial sound, and, like a true knight of Tara, he dashed against his foe. And swinging his sword above his head, with one blow he clove the silver helmet, and the strange warrior reeled from his horse and fell upon the golden bridge. The prince, content with this achievement, spurred his horse to pass the fallen champion, but the horse refused to stir, and the bridge broke in two almost at his feet, and the part of it between him and the mainland disappeared beneath the lake, carrying with it the horse and the body of the champion. And before the prince could recover from his surprise, his steed wheeled round and was galloping back. When he reached the land, he rushed through the forest, and the prince was not able to pull him up until he came to the palace door. Well, it's your own fault. I don't feel bad for you. All that night, the prince lay awake on his couch with his eyes fixed upon the window, but no shadow fell upon the floor, and there was no tapping at the pane. And with a heavy heart, he joined the hunting party in the morning. And day followed day. And his heart was sadder and sadder, and found no pleasure in the joys and delights of fairyland. And when all in the palace were at rest, he used to roam through the forest, always thinking of the Princess Ailin, and hoping against hope that the little woman would come again to him. But at last he began to despair of ever seeing her. It chanced one night he rambled so far that he found himself on the verge of the lake, at the very spot from which the golden bridge had been thrown across the waters. And as he gazed wistfully upon them, a boat shot up and came swiftly to the bank. And who should he see sitting in the stern but the little woman? "Oh, Cuglas, Cuglas," she said, "I gave you 3 chances, and you failed in all of them." "I should have borne the pain inflicted by the monster's claw," said Cuglas. "I should have borne the thirst on the sandy desert, and dashed the crystal cup untasted from the fairy's hand. But I could never have faced the nobles and chiefs of Erin if I had refused to meet the challenge of the battle champion on the Golden Bridge." "And you would have been no true knight of Erin, and you would not have been worthy of the wee girl who loves you, the bonny Prince Ailin, if you'd refused to meet it," said the little woman. "But for all that, you can never return to the fair hills of Erin. But cheer up, Cuglas. There are mossy ways and forest paths and nestling bowers in fairyland. Lonely they are, I know, in your eyes now," said the little woman. "But maybe," she added, with a laugh as musical as the ripple on a streamlet when summer is in the air, "maybe you won't always think them so lonely." "You think I'll forget Ailin for the fairy queen?" said Cuglas with a sigh. "I don't think anything of the kind," said she. "Then what do you mean?" said the prince. "Oh, I mean what I mean," said the little woman. "But I can't stop here all night talking to you, and indeed it is in your bed you ought to be yourself. So now good night, and I have no more to say, except that perhaps if you happen to be here this night week at this night week at this very hour, when the moon will still be on the waters, you will see. But no matter what you will see," said she, "I must be off." And before the prince could say another word, the boat sped away from the bank, and he was alone. He went back to the palace, and he fell asleep that night, only to dream of the Princess Ailin. As for the princess, I forgot about her, right? Yeah, all alone. As for the princess, she was pining away in the palace of Tara. The color had fled from her cheeks, and her eyes, which had once been so bright they would have lighted darkness like a star, lost nearly all their luster. And the king's leeches could do nothing for her, and at last they gave up all hope. And the king and queen of Erin and the ladies of the court watched her couch by night and by day, sadly waiting for her last hour. At length one day, when the sun was shining brightly over Tara's plain, and its light, softened by the intervening curtains, was falling in the sick chamber, the royal watchers noticed a sweet change coming over the face of the princess. The bloom of love and youth were flushing on her cheeks, and from her eyes shone out the old, soft, tender light, and they began to hope she was about to be restored to them, when suddenly the room was in darkness as if the night had swept across the sky and blotted out the sun. Then they heard the sound of fairy music, and over the couch where the princess lay they beheld a gleam of golden light, but only for a moment, and again there was perfect darkness, and the fairy music ceased. Then as suddenly as it came, the darkness vanished. The softened sunlight once more filled the chamber and rested upon the couch. But the couch was empty, and the royal watchers, looking at each other, said in whispers, "The fairies have carried the Princess Ailin to fairyland." Ooh, okay. We're almost done. Well, that very day, the prince roamed by himself through the forest, counting the hours until the day would fade in the sky and the moon would come climbing up. And at last, when it was shining full above the waters, he went down to the verge of the lake. And he looked out over the gleaming surface, watching for the vision promised by the little woman. But he could see nothing, and was about to turn away when he heard the faint sound of fairy music. He listened and listened, and the sound came nearer and clearer, and away in the distance, like drops of glistening water breaking the level of the lake, he saw a fleet of fairy boats, and he thought it was the fairy queen sailing in the moonlight. And it was the fairy queen, and soon he was able to recognize the royal shallop leading the others. And as it came close to the bank, he saw the little woman sitting in the prow between the little harpers. And at the stern was the fairy queen, and by her side the lady of his heart, the Princess Ailin. In a second, the boat was against the bank, and the princess was in his arms, and he kissed her again and again. "And have you never a kiss for me?" said the little woman, tapping his hand with the golden bodkin. "A kiss and a dozen," said Cuglas, and he caught the little fairy up in his arms. "Oh, fie, Cuglas," said the queen. "Oh, the princess isn't one bit jealous," said the little woman. "Are you, Ailin?" "Indeed, I am not," said Ailin. "And you should not be," said the fairy queen, "for never lady yet had truer knight than Cuglas. I loved him, and I love him dearly. I lured him here hoping that in the delights of fairyland he might forget you. It was all in vain. I know now that there is one thing no fairy power above or below the stars, or beneath the waters can ever subdue, and that is love. And here together forever shall you and Cuglas dwell, where old age shall never come upon you, and where pain or sorrow or sickness are unknown." And Cuglas never returned to the fair hills of Erin, and ages passed away since the morning he followed the hounds into the fatal cave. But his story was remembered by the firesides, and sometimes, even yet, the herd boy watching his cattle in the fields hears the tuneful cry of hounds and follows it till it leads him to some darksome cave. And as fearfully he listens to the sound becoming fainter and fainter, he hears the clatter of hoofs over the stony floor. And to this day, the cave bears the name of the prince who entered it, never to return. Oh, I'm so glad we chose this one. We may have to do romance for a couple of weeks in a row. We had some sad stories and some scary stories in the last book, so I could use some really good, wholesome fairies stories. So yeah, I hope you guys like that one. The pronunciations in that one were at least a little easier. I have a feeling as we get further in, you guys are going to get to watch me struggle. But that's fun. We've done that before. So yes, again, thank you guys so much for being with me tonight. I moved the laptop over there so it wasn't like looking, I didn't keep like looking down at it behind the camera. So I'm not sure who has been here tonight, if we've had numbers. If not, that's okay. It's going to be a long weekend. People can catch up. And yeah, but you guys were here and you're watching again, hopefully in a few days. And I hope you're back with me next Wednesday. We're going to keep this going. I am so happy that we started doing this again. It's nice to have something to look forward to every week, and I hope this is something that you guys look forward to. So, with that being said, like, subscribe, notifications, the whole deal on the YouTube. Do it. And I'll talk to you guys later, okay?